this week's instalment of our AGS Inspire Leadership Development Program. This week's session is on leading change. Now, like all of our sessions, it's delivered in a flipped learning manner, which means this is the pre-session learning video that you watch prior to attending our face-to-face session. Now, the best way to get the most out of this video is to feel free to pause it, rewind, take some notes, watch it again, and reflect either on your own or with a colleague on some of the things that I pose you in the video. So let's get straight into this week's focus then, which is leading change. Now, any leader will tell you that it's far easier to go into a high-performing organisation and maintain those standards than going into an organisation that needs change, where you have to lead change from the front. This is real leadership, and this is where you really need to move thoughts, move staff, and really move the whole organisation forward. And as we've always talked about in the last session, there are no silver bullets in our education. There are no really easy, quick wins, and if it was that easy, we'd all be doing it, and no schools would be struggling. One of the things that I think has come into education that you've probably heard about is this idea of the marginal gains approach, and that was made so famous by the British cycling team. And that idea is to make lots of little changes that make small impact, but actually when you add them all up together, it makes a big change. I think that's what we really need to be looking for as leaders now, rather than trying to turn our organisation around overnight. Okay, let's look at then how we're really going to do that. And I think the first thing I want to talk about is the why. And this idea is selling the why before you show the what. And this is all about really talking to people about why you're going to do a certain change project, and giving really people the idea and understanding of why something is needed, rather than this is what we're going to do. And I think if you do it that way around, you can start to talk to people and talk to their hearts and talk to their minds about the fact that a change is needed. And once you do that, and once people accept that there is a change needed, and you can get people to accept that we need to go forward in this direction because the organisation is underperforming, then once you've got people on board with that, then you can tell them the what, and it's far easier for people to accept. I think there's been far too many things that have changed in education over the last few years, 5, 10, 15 years, that people are quite reticent to change, certainly if they think it's just change for the sake of it. So it's really important to think about any project you're going to lead, in whatever capacity you are currently in, to make sure that you sell the why first before you show the what. Okay, the next section I want to talk about is using the influence of others. And it's very easy to think that as a leader in your school or your faculty, your department, your year group, that this change has got to come all from you. And yes, you might have the vision, you might have the plan, but it's quite naive to think that you can do this all on your own. And the idea here is that you need to understand who are the key people in your organisation that can help you influence others. And if you go back to your days as a child at school, think about who were the people in your friendship group. Who were the people on the playground that people followed? Who were the people that when someone said, we'll do this, everyone said yes? And you need to identify who are those people in your staff room. Who are the big characters? Who are the influencers? And once you've identified those people, then start to think about how can we start to use those people to influence others? How can we start to use their ideas or their characteristics to actually help your project move forward? And this is really important to think that it shouldn't always be about you. And the idea that actually, like in all way, shape, or form in life, there are horses for courses, and there are different people that you might use for different projects because of their characteristics, who they are, their experience, or their connections. So the idea here is make sure you know your influences in your staff room and start to utilise them effectively. Okay, next we're going to move on to what we're going to call a pre-mortem. Now, in most things in life, when things go wrong, we do a post-mortem, and we do a full analysis of what went wrong, why it went wrong. But seldom do we do a pre-mortem before the activity itself. And this was an idea that I saw on a TED talk a couple of years ago that I thought was a fantastic idea. And the idea is that you get all of your team, you sell your vision, you talk about the plan, and everything's ready. And then we start to say, right, what might go wrong? And the key here is you are giving your staff or your team permission to be really negative. Now, normally on most days, people won't want to be negative towards you. They will feel you might be they're letting you down, or they're being a drain or a strain on you. And what you're saying here is, no, I want you to be negative. Let's find every single thing that could go wrong with this project, and then next to it, let's write a solution on what we're going to do to combat that. If you do that, your project has obviously got far more chance of being successful, because you've already thought about all those little things that could go wrong, and you've done something about it. So that idea of a pre-mortem before the project has even taken place is essential, and I think you should then start to think about that for any projects that you've coming up. How can you do that with your team prior to it starting? Next, and linked with the pre-mortem, is blockers. In every organization, whether it's a school, whether it's an industry, a factory, you will have people who are blockers. And what I mean by blockers, they are people who are reticent to change, and they will try and stop your change happening and your project happening from being successful, because for whatever reason, they just don't want it to work. It might be something personal, that they have seen this type of style before. They just don't want to change. They don't like change. And actually, it's about using your influences from the last point to actually make positive influence on these blockers, and try to target, who are the blockers and why are they the blockers, and then let's start to get the influencers, or yourself if you feel you can, to make a change to their mindset. Because once you get your blockers on side, once you get your influencers on side, then your project is probably going to have a far significant chance of being successful in your school. Without that, any plan that doesn't have your influencers and doesn't have your blockers on side is probably bound to fail. Okay, and lastly, sustainability. Research suggests that nearly 70% of all change management plans don't work for one reason or another. And largely this is due to all the things that we've already talked about. So a lack of planning based on the fact that, that you haven't thought about the blockers, you haven't used your influencers properly, you haven't done a pre-mortem, and you haven't sold the why to your staff. So making sure that you do all those things and that your project has some sustainability far longer than the actual honeymoon period. Most projects will work for the first few days, the first few weeks, maybe even the first few months. But actually, because of a lack of planning and because of a lack of monitoring and sustainability in thinking how we're going to keep this going, lots of things drop off. Think about your own school. How many next big things have happened in your school that actually you don't even exist now, you don't see them, because over the last few months or the last year or so, there hasn't been a program of sustainability or monitoring built into it. So that's what we've looked at in this video, and I want you to think about all of those things in terms of your own leadership style, your own projects, things that you might be moving forward on in the next few days, weeks or months. And we're going to unpack this a little bit more in the session itself. We're going to do a little bit of a practical session about how we can use all of these things and we can plan for all these areas in a program of change coming up. But lastly, I just want you to reflect on previous experience, either a project that you've delivered or tried to deliver, or a project that you've been on the receiving end of, should I say, and two questions. A, why was it successful? So why did something you deliver, why was it successful? Or a project that you've had delivered whole school. Again, was it down to any of the, the influencers, making sure we've resolved the blockers? Was there a pre-mortem in place? Was the why sold really well? And it may be that you hadn't stopped to think about it previously, but now when we've, peeled a few layers off there, you start to say, yeah, I didn't realize that happened, but now I can reflect on that, and now I can see why that was done. Or alternatively, a project that hasn't gone very well. And again, why didn't it go very well? Were there things that weren't done? So was there any sustainability factored in? Was if the why wasn't sold initially and people just didn't want it to happen, etc., etc. So thinking about those things as we move towards the face-to-face session, and hopefully this is again made you stop and reflect about your own leadership style, your own the way you will move projects forward, and then I look forward to seeing you this week at the face-to-face session where we'll unpack this a little bit more. Thank you.